So our guest today is Dr. Simon Rogoff, who publishes the Narcissism, Trauma, and Celebrity Substack publication. And I'm so delighted to have you. You were the first person to give me a written recommendation when I came here. And we gave each other mutual recommendations, and it was wonderful to meet you. And you were using a pseudonym then, and I thought we might want to start with that. But first, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background?
Hi, Rebecca. It's great to meet with you and have this this chat. We'll see where it goes. My professional, I'm in London and quite a way away from you, and I work in a service that treats people with complex trauma and diagnosis of personality disorder in South London for the National Health Service. My background's a bit more complicated than that. I've worked in different areas of mental health, also forensic and working with rough sleepers as well, with mental health problems. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. That's the main bits about me. Really.
Oh, that's all. So that's a rich background, and I'd love to hear about what inspired you to come on Substack, start your Narcissism, Trauma, and Celebrity publication. And you were using a different name when I first met you. And I remember, I'll never forget that post. Oh, I loved it so much where you said, I am going to come out behind from the pseudonym and use my actual name. So tell us more about that.
It felt quite risky. I thought, well, if this goes wrong, then I'm going to just have to give up my Substack, because I think I'm going to go back to my worry about using my real name, because I was working in a service where we deliver evidence-based treatments, and I wanted to come on Substack and kind of experiment a bit and play with ideas. And I think I was worried that people would hear me kind of playing with ideas on the kind of experimental side of these subjects, on the kind of fringes of them, kind of like, where if we do this, and I worried that people might get the impression that when we're treating people in a service, we're kind of playing with these ideas, and we're not really. We're quite constrained about what treatments we're allowed to offer in the national. They have to be evidence-based models of treatment. So I think I had that worry about having these kind of two hats and wanting to be an experimental person and kind of do a bit of creative writing as well. Impression to my clients that, yeah, we're just playing with ideas here, you know. So I think that was my main concern, I think. And then I think the thing that really, I realized somebody was kind of speaking truth to me when they said, you know, you're kind of asking people to trust you, and you're calling yourself a psychologist, but you're not using your real name, and that might raise alarm bells for people. It might be a bit of a contradiction there. And I had to do a little bit of soul searching. Then it felt a bit of a risk, but I was very glad that I'd done it.
What changed for you when you came out from behind that pseudonym and had your real name on your work?
Important for me to join these two. You know, I'm the same person. I can be do a bit of creative writing and play with ideas, and I'm not telling people that to me at work. Right. And I might get things wrong or take a risk in writing that I might not take at work.
That's right. That's right.
The subject that when I'm on Substack in any form, I'm any ideas I'm expressing on my own, and they don't represent the organisation that employs me, the NHS or the trust that employs me there. So they're all my opinions. I'm not representing my employer. But bringing together those two parts of me, that's not me at work. But actually, I'm using experience at work, knowledge, things I've read about, the things I've studied, and my training, and I'm drawing from that. But I'm also applying it to something a bit different, and I'm not trying to kind of get it right all the time and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I really respected it. It not only has my own paid community and well, my community, free and paid subscribers, inspired me to really come out from behind the clinical mask, which is why I started my personal reflection Substack, The Violet Self. And I can't tell you the healing I've experienced since I was able to really come out more authentically on Substack. And I think my connections are deeper. And I wanted to do it on a separate Substack just so I could kind of keep the container because we do a lot of community group stuff and not muck it up with my stuff. But that was very freeing and healing for me. What led you to decide to start a narcissism, trauma, and celebrity publication?
Yeah, I think I just, over the years of sitting in lots of meetings talking about narcissism and how it links up with other mental health problems, just realizing that just nobody really, it almost feels a bit like a taboo subject, this kind of what I've come to call the performance phase of narcissism, that there's a part of narcissism that doesn't fit the mainstream kind of online narrative about it. Narcissism's a bit wider than that. And then there are some times when we see people using narcissistic strategies and we literally applaud them. And it's kind of uncomfortable. But I guess I'm trying to sit with that contradiction, if you like, and see where it goes, because I think and I just, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, these people have got biographies written about them. We can read about their childhoods. What does it say if somebody used one kind of narcissistic strategy, the wish to be idealized and admired, he took that to the extreme? Then what else do we find out about them? Either about what made them that kind of person, the kind of childhood they had, and also are there other aspects of narcissism in their adulthood that kind of get brushed under the carpet or get called something else? And it's kind of an experiment to kind of almost, some of them I've really kind of gone in blind. I thought, I don't know anything about this person's childhood. Some of them I've heard about a little bit. And then the exciting ones have been kind of where I don't know absolutely nothing about the person's childhood. I say exciting because it's also quite sad sometimes to kind of go in and then find out, oh, sometimes there's a kind of a heart sink moment, where you think, why nobody ever talks about this, and this is what had happened to this person.
Which celebrity has surprised you most when you did start digging into their childhood, and what kinds of things might have surprised you? Has anyone come to mind?
I think really the ones that I knew least about. So, I'm not really interested in Humphrey Bogart. He's before my time in a way. I haven't followed his films, so I feel kind of. And Louis Armstrong, I'm a great fan of his music, but I've never been interested in. I don't know anything about Louis Armstrong, the person. So and David Bowie actually. Because I thought I knew more about him than I did. And again, just finding the kind of details and trying to put myself in his shoes. It's the ones that surprised me are the ones that I found most interesting, but they're also the saddest. Maybe I'm on a journey of making friends with my sadness or something and doing all this part of it personally. But because why am I finding this so fulfilling? I mean, that's a big question for me, I suppose. But yeah, the ones that I've known where I've been most surprised with, the most interesting for me.
Who do you feel had some of the most severe narcissistic abuse? Which celebrity do you look at them and say they really were a victim of narcissistic abuse in their childhood, and that probably defined them and moved them toward a more attention-seeking profession?
I think there's a couple. I think around the time I decided to look into Humphrey Bogart, somebody had said on Substack something about people who've had a comfortable start in life are not traumatized. I can't remember the exact words, but I think it might have been. And the idea that if somebody's had a comfortable start in life, then we can't explain their adult strategies for living by their childhood. And what made me look at Humphrey Bogart? I thought, okay, well, I think I knew that he'd had rich parents or something like that. So I started looking into him, and then with in his biographies, there's a lot. The people who have kind of famous parents, then there's a lot of information about the parents as well. Like
Right.
you could get bits and pieces, but I think she wanted to be a performer as well, but she was quite a poor woman, and there she wasn't known. She wasn't. She didn't have.
Who was this? Because the name cut out. What celebrity?
I was just thinking. I was comparing with some like Elvis's mother wasn't famous,
Elvis's mother. Oh, well, we could talk about that, couldn't we? Woo. So,
but
I mean, I see that where Elvis was her emotional spouse,
yeah, yeah,
and then he was having to live for both himself and his twin that died at birth.
yeah. And then his dad was in prison for a while.
Yeah.
Uh, there was there was a lot of shame about that, and going back, there was real destitution in the family before that. But yes, he was the one that survived. Interesting that
Yeah.
his name's an anagram of lives.
Aaron, and he's living for two, and that's why he had the middle name Aaron, because that was his twin that had died at birth, and he had guilt about surviving. Now, talk about grooming. Elizabeth Taylor's mother. I know a lot about Elizabeth. Tell me a little bit about her parents and the grooming that Elizabeth's mother did from a very young age.
Yeah, so Elizabeth Taylor's mum had been an actress, Sarah, I think her name was, but she hadn't really taken off. Her career hadn't really taken off. Um, and she'd married what was his name? Francis, wasn't it? Yeah, she'd married and then had a daughter, and then it seems everything got invested in the daughter. She'd remind Elizabeth that she'd given up this.
She gave up her acting career for Elizabeth, right? Or to be a wife and mother. And the
Yeah,
father was an art dealer. Yeah.
yeah. And then there was this. Interestingly, there was this one play that she'd been in. I mean, there's probably loads of places she'd been. There was this one that was kind of as high as her career got, and then she got Elizabeth to rehearse the lines of that play night after night after night. And then there's a suggestion that there was some scene where she had to be tearful, and eventually she got so tired of doing this, she eventually broke down in tears, and then she's kind of rewarded for being a good actress or something when she's really young.
Mhm.
And there's this picture of her mum being so driven, taking her daughter to meet influential people. There was this really high status journalist at the time. And she was a kind of veteran critic. I can't remember her name, but she met with this mother and daughter, and she wrote afterwards that the daughter was clearly terrified, but the mother wasn't going to kind of give up until her daughter was famous.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then, uh, and then there's this. Her breakthrough film was the National Velvet, this horse
That's no
ride.
velvet. Yeah. Hmm.
That looking back over her life, her happiest moments, I think, were on the back of a horse. Probably when she felt freest.
She
But
was thrown off a horse during National Velvet, and that's
yeah,
why she had those horrible back problems the rest of her life. Ended up in a wheelchair when she was older. It was a terrible fall. She did all the writing.
yeah,
She did all
and
the writing in that movie. Yeah.
think that scene made it into the film, and you can't tell the pain she's in. And for
Nope.
me, she's already learning to put her real self to one side,
Right.
even if this is kind of going to be chronic pain for the rest of her. So clearly she's injured her back, and
Yeah.
at the age of, I can't remember how old she was at that point, but she's kind of trained to put her feelings down,
Mhm.
soldier on, and
Well,
then
here's another thing she had to do for that film. She was maturing, and they said you're going to look to, old for the part. So she's mother helped her starve herself, and then she had to bind herself to get that role.
Yeah. Yeah. And meanwhile, her friends are playing kids' games and, having
Exactly. Yes. Tell me, when we talked privately before the live stream a week or two ago, tell me more about, as a clinical psychologist, when you say you view narcissism as a strategy. And I want to emphasize this isn't to diminish anyone who suffered from narcissistic abuse or excusing it, which reminds me my epic coffee cup of today, given the subject of narcissists. There's a little stain on it, but um, if I hug you, it's to figure out how big a hole I need to dig in the backyard. Today's
That's
cup. I'll show it later in the stream for latecomers. So, with that in mind, that many of us here have suffered and been very much harmed by a narcissistic parent or sibling or other family member or employer or who knows who. Tell me your view of narcissism as a strategy.
Yeah, I suppose one aspect of thinking about narcissism as a set of strategies is, well, it's moving a little bit away from um, thinking of narcissism almost as a kind of person, um, which some of the language makes it sound like, and we'll probably come on to the complex PTSD and borderline personality disorder and these kind of things.
Yeah, I want to talk about that with you for sure. Everyone out there, we're going to be talking about complex trauma and PTSD. We came in late, and Dr. Rogoff runs the program for the NHS treating such individuals. So we will get to that, but keep going with narcissism as a strategy.
I suppose I mentioned that because one of the things I like about the way people, different ways of thinking about something like borderline personality disorder is as a set of strategies that have been learned in an extreme situation. And first of all, that means that it's not a kind of person that we're immune from being. It's a set of strategies that we could find ourselves using in the right situation, if we're put in that situation, and that we can unlearn those strategies or learn new strategies for actions. And so thinking about narcissism as a set of strategies, in a way, it means that none of us are completely off the hook, that we can, if provoked, we can use narcissistic strategies. And also, if we look at the definitions of narcissism, some aspects of narcissism are about performing and sometimes uncomfortably, some aspects of narcissism are victimless, and we may see somebody on a stage and applaud them, and so there's this. It's more complex than it looks. Than we hear about online sometimes, but also, and that this is not to kind of water down how severe narcissism can be, because if we use a particular set of strategies, and we don't have any other set of strategies, then that's more extreme. We don't have a repertoire outside of narcissism. Some clinicians, some people at work use narcissistic strategies, and we hope they go home and they put them down. And
We hope
5-year-old use different strategies. We hope, not always, what we hope, and that's a sign of flexibility and not severity of narcissism. But some people only have the narcissistic option. And then we could think about, well, how compulsively does somebody have to use these strategies? Are they compelled? Do we only see them using them this severely or this severely, but never not at all? So they're always in kind of narcissistic strategy in how they're getting their emotional needs met. And so there's still the possibility of great severity in people kind of going around compulsively using narcissistic strategies, regardless of whether the situation calls for it or not. There's a lovely article by the daughter of a very famous psychologist, Erickson. There are two Ericksons, but the Erickson who actually wrote about child psychology, and his book took off in the 50s or 60s. And there's an article by his daughter who became a psychotherapist and talked about what he was like as a father and how he couldn't put this down and be emotionally intimate with her when her boyfriend dumped her. She gives this kind of example. So that's an example of a kind of a rigidity. So somebody kind of stuck in a narrow set of strategies.
And how would that translate to a narcissistic family system? And I'd also like to look at narcissistic parent versus maybe a malignant narcissistic parent. So you take a parent who's using primarily narcissistic strategies in this family they're creating. How might that show up in a family system, and how might that look in terms of impacting a child in that, what I call a narcissistic family system, where the power holder of the family has these narcissistic traits or strategies on a continuum, some more extreme than others. Far into the continuum, I would see as malignant narcissism. So what might that look like in a family system with a narcissistic parent using strategies?
Yeah. So the example I just used with the daughter's called Erickson Bond. She's talking about her father, and really what she's describing is, I think she was 14 and her boyfriend dumped her, and she was in tears, and mum's not there, and she has this dad who's this famous author, and he's kind of freezes, and there's this inability to emotionally become any closer than actually quite distanced from his own daughter, who he knows day to day, and he can't respond from his own emotional self to his. So I suppose one result we might predict in a narcissistic family system is emotional distance and a lack of empathy, could say, is another way of putting it, but a lack of emotional connectedness or recognition of this is what my child is actually feeling, or a curiosity about what is my child feeling. And we see that in Elizabeth Taylor, actually. There's a lot written about the mother-daughter relationship, and there's a kind of a disregard for the child's mind, whether it be their desires or their distress. So there's an episode in Humphrey Bogart's life where I think he's 13, and he gets taken off to an artist studio by his mum without being told anything about what's going to happen. And he's going to pose naked for an art class day that week. And there's this kind of, and it's because she needs it to happen. So somebody's sick. I think the original booked person was sick or something. And he's kind of, but there's also this possibility that he was wheeled out as he was already a trophy child. He was named Humphrey because that was her maiden name. So Humphrey, just his mum's maiden name and his dad's family name. He doesn't have his own name. And then she calls him Hump at home. So, but the reason I was thinking about this artist studio thing is because his feelings are just unimportant. They don't matter at all. She's blind to them. So there's this emotional kind of disregard for the child, and then all it does. Oh, what's Billy feel? How does Billy feel about that? Oh, you feel like that? I didn't think you'd feel like that. This kind of readiness to be, this curiosity about how the child feels about this or that.
Would you say the child's objectified and dehumanized, so to speak. They're something to be used versus loved and cherished. He was just sent off to pose naked as a young teenager in our class because his mother needed him to. I mean, that's pretty
Yeah,
objectifying.
really a trophy child because he was the Maud Humphrey baby who was a star at the age of 1, I think, for the Millions baby food advert, and she'd drawn this picture up. She was an artist, and so he was famous as at 12 months old or something. Like he was the Millions baby food baby, um, the Maud Humphrey baby. So and so she might have wheeled him out as a 13-year-old, saying, "Actually, this is the Millions baby.
Mm,
This is him now." So he's just this trophy. She dressed him up. She dressed him up so ridiculously for school that he got beaten up by children at school. And then his dad said 2 things on the way to hospital with a broken nose. One is, it's your fault for getting your nose broken. The other one is your mum's fault for calling you a sissy name, Humphrey. So, nobody cares about how he's feeling at any of these points. But objectified, yeah. So he's a kind of this doll, really.
a
And
doll, yeah. And it's interesting because his character in films is often a real tough guy. You wouldn't imagine him being beat up as a child in school, but there's a sensitivity underneath, which made him, to me, a really compelling actor because you can see this sensitivity peeking through this real
yeah,
tough guy exterior.
food kind of, uh, 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 um, and the scar on his lip. They had some marketing publicity stories about how he got the mark on his lip, but it's fairly compelling that his dad punched him in the face.
Hmm.
That there was a
Yeah.
story in the army making him into a bit of a hero, but famous lisp, which was part of his distinctive persona, was a consequence of his dad's violence.
I wanted to maybe take a minute here just to offer a question a subscriber had that they left on the post a week or two ago, if we can just go there for a minute. And then I'll be asking if anyone has questions in the live stream and or wants to come on camera and speak with us. And then, of course, we'll also talk more about complex trauma and PTSD. So I'll just read you what this person wrote. My father died 4 months ago, and I have had minimal contact with my mother, but I have become very aware of her presence in my own head. We were enmeshed, and I over-identified and have overfunctioned for her in the past, but am struggling to have a sense of self in my own head. I am working on inner and outer boundaries and cultivating my own sense of self, but something else has come up which has made me curious. I watched a program in the UK last week called Couples Therapy, and in it, there was a woman who has gone no contact with her own mother. The therapist, in discussion with her supervisor, was talking about how children who choose to go no contact can assume the persona of the parent they ended contact with, in this case, the mother, in order to preserve and maintain a relationship, even though there's been a ending contact, assuming the persona and taking on the identity of the other person, including their not so helpful traits. I'm curious to understand more about these ideas, and apologies for maybe not explaining well, but hopefully you can understand what I mean. So that would tie into family systems homeostasis, where I talk about when a scapegoating parent dies, sometimes literally at the funeral, the voice of the parent's coming through the mouth of a sibling, and the scapegoating starts. I've had more than once previous clients literally over the grave, a sibling come up and say, "You took mom's jewelry," or and all, "You're a liar," or "You're crazy." I mean, literally right at the funeral, like they've introjected and taken in the dead parent to keep that parent alive. And of course, it's very shocking for the scapegoated adult child because they thought it would be over when that parent went into the ground. And now it's happening through a sibling. So I was reminded of that when I read this question of this would tie more into internal family systems too, when the dead parent's introjected, how we think of it, and you're having a relationship with them still in their head, even though they're dead, and maybe you're even acting like them sometimes. I don't know if you've seen a celebrity case study like that, or just what your thoughts are on that as a psychologist.
I think, yeah. Well, there's a lot. There's a lot in there, I think, isn't there? But
There is.
the one, my mind went in a couple of different directions. One is that I'll say it so I can get it out of my mind. But one is that when somebody's alive, I guess we can take a role in relation to them, and it might be opposing, or something else. But if if we're opposed to somebody and they're no longer there, I guess there's a kind of almost there might be a kind of a rebound effect, but I don't know. I haven't read much about that, but we no longer have the system has changed, hasn't it? So the actual system of people has changed, so that we no longer in a system where we're distancing from that person, and then that person's not there.
Mm-hmm.
System suddenly changes. It all sounds a bit cold calling family systems, doesn't it? But people know what we mean. The other, and we do, when we're on the receiving end of a parent's strategies, what I like about this theory of roles and our strategies being attempts to get into a role, of being idealized or being judgmental as opposed to the judged, or um, it is that we when we if I'm a child being judged a lot, I experience the pain of being in that situation. I have to come up with a strategy to deal with it. But I also experience somebody using a strategy of shaming or judging.
Yes, and shaming's really big, and judging's really big when you're scapegoated. That's what you're getting a lot of.
Um, and so it comes back a bit to the question you asked me before about the scapegoating family and the strategies that we might find there. But we do. So, for example, Louis Armstrong, he's in this terribly poor, desperate childhood, and yet, and he only sees his father when his father's dressed up, marching in the parade. Nothing's touching him. You know, his distorted experience of his father, who has abandoned him as well, but is this kind of non-vulnerable, kind of shiny adult who he just wants to be. You know, that whatever the father's doing, he's not vulnerable.
Mm.
John Lennon's father traveling around the world and sending him postcards, talking about how he's entertaining the ship's crew, um, and so we might, or even Michael Jackson being victimized by his father in very violent ways, but at the same time experiencing somebody in a very powerful role. These people who find themselves in quite powerful positions as adults. Michael Jackson was never accused of being violent, but we we observe what we observe, and if we observe strategies of our parents using certain strategies to be invulnerable, and then vulnerability is the thing that we, as a priority, want to stay far away from, then these strategies that we've observed, even if they were used in relation to us, are an option, and we've had a kind of privileged front seat view of
So
them.
that if a parent dies, as this questioner was asking, on an unconscious level, they might start employing similar strategies to that parent
Yeah,
because they saw that and learned that, and it's a way to keep the parent alive even if it's unconscious, and stay in that dynamic of then maybe there might be self-shaming, self-judgment, and you're still imprisoned in a way, even though that scapegoating parent's gone, imprisoned from within your own psyche.
yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that could be going on, aren't there? Because I'm thinking about losing, even losing a parent is difficult, and it might trigger difficult feelings, even if the parent is hated, or it's a very difficult relationship. So there might be feelings that are triggered that might be a bit underground, or there might be feelings that are not underground that are just difficult to manage. And I'm also thinking that if our experience of this parent again is of them being the non-vulnerable one, I'm a bit obsessed with this word vulnerable, but if our experience of them is being the non-vulnerable one, and we're trying to get away from, we've been plunged into an experience of vulnerability by loss, take on those strategies specifically to deal with the vulnerability that's been triggered by their loss. But I'm overthinking it, but where do we get our strategies from for dealing with vulnerability, especially if vulnerability has been unsafe for us in our early years?
And when you say strategies, you're meaning it more subconsciously. It's not like someone's thinking, I'll do this and that. It's through conditioning and just like survival strategies, we might say.
Yeah, exactly. And some of them might be completely unconscious. And I was talking to somebody this week who's had a baby, and as psychologists, we read books about child rearing, and then we have a baby, and it's not the books that come into our mind; it's what done to me. How was this done in my home? And it's difficult to put that to one side and think, well, what do the textbooks say? No, I can't remember what the textbooks say. How do we do this in my family? And it's quite strong to kind of to identify with. To some extent, we internalize these kind of roles, don't we? And we might have to. There may be other roles which we've learned along the way, and we might say, no, I'm going to employ this one, or I'm going to be a parent like that teacher I had in second grade or something.
Yeah.
There are other templates, but I think the templates are more present in some situations than any kind of textbook or.
That reminds me of when I was in grad school. My one of my professors, who wonderful with family systems, she interned with all the founders: Murray Bowen, Virginia Satir, Salvador Minuchin. And she told a story of 4 generations of women during a holiday. And so the daughter's watching the mother put this pot roast into a pan. She cut off both ends. So the daughter says, Mom, why do you cut both ends off the pot roast? She says, because my mom does. So the girl goes out and says, Grandma, why do you cut off both ends of the pot roast? She said, because my mom did. Great grandma, why do you cut off both ends of the pot roast? She said, well, one year I didn't have a big enough pan.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
Come to the family culture.
Yeah. I want to just segue a bit into complex trauma and borderline personality disorder, which is in the program you run, what you're treating. And I know you had more you wanted to say around that. And then I want to see, Elizabeth, Elizabeth's a therapist. She's a classic family dynamics history. And then I'm going to see if anyone wants to come on camera. I'm going to look at this live chat here and see who has questions. But tell me a little bit about what you want to share about complex trauma and borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing, there's a big debate at the moment, isn't there, about are these different things, or what if borderline personality disorder is a separate thing? What are we? We need to find a new name for it. So it's in some ways it's an exciting time, and it's great that the European manual has complex PTSD as a diagnosis now. But I think that is almost a kind of a watershed moment, that we've had this one kind of diagnosis which is defined by the trauma, which is PTSD. Before that, we had shell shock, and it's evolved. And yet all these other diagnoses are not defined by the thing that was in the background that caused it. And now we've got complex PTSD, which clearly overlaps between what's been called borderline personality disorder and PTSD, and kind of overlaps with both of them. And it just does seem to be quite a game changer. And at the same time, borderline personality disorder or EUPD has become so much more understood. There's been so much research about it that although its name hasn't changed, the what it says on the tin hasn't changed, hasn't moved on at all.
If you had a magic wand like me, because my hairdresser gave that to me, Bing, would you change borderline personality disorder as a term? Would you get rid of it?
Yeah, it doesn't mean
Tell
anything.
me why because I agree. And I say in my book, introductory book on family scapegoating abuse, rejected, shamed, and blamed, I talk about how often people come to me and over time I realize they're scapegoated in their family and they've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, sometimes other personality disorders, but especially BPD. And I've had clients from the UK because I'm doing coaching, not therapy. I'll have them go back to the NHS and have them re-diagnosed. And every time they've been diagnosed with complex trauma and not borderline personality disorder.
So I think let's just say let's take the route, which I'd be completely happy with, that whereby borderline personality disorder gets called a kind of complex PTSD, which I think is a sensible way. There's a number of competing terms in the UK. In my service, there's we use quite a lot the term complex emotional needs. I think the Anna Freud Center talk about developmental trauma. There's some competing kind of terms around. But say we go with this direction, we say BPD is a kind of complex PTSD. It still has to be a different kind of complex PTSD than complex PTSD because of the kind of treatment that helps. Complex PTSD often points towards memories and reprocessing as a priority in treatment, looking at the past. And what is currently called borderline personality disorder, the evidence base suggests, and we see this in treatments like dialectical behavior therapy and mentalization based therapy, is more looking at the present and working with the strategies that have come out of an extreme situation. The program I lead is mentalization based treatment. Mentalizing is really the capacity to work with, notice, make sense of thoughts, feelings in myself and other people in the contexts of close relationships, where if we take two extremes, the train crash, the old simple PTSD picture, that the train crash is the situation which was unsafe and overwhelming. Now, if a relationship is something that was unsafe and overwhelming, then the evidence suggests that working in a close relationship and building these capacities and noticing the alarm bells live as they come up in an authentic relationship is the most effective way forward.
That the relationship helps heal the unsafe past relationships. And think about this, when you grow up scapegoated from an early age, which I did, part of it was because I was born with a terminal illness and the family was way overstressed already from many, many, many things that show up in the adverse childhood experiences test. The relationship with the parents and sometimes as siblings and extended relatives, our first primary relationships are not safe or contained. And that's what our brain develops around in the neural pathways. And that's why I say this form of abuse is so insidious and so ingrained, and we're so conditioned. It's hard to even see ourselves as having been harmed in relationship. Often we're told we're the problem. But we have to talk about safety in relationships if we're going to talk about healing from the original unsafe relationship, which was with our parents. And it's why it's so critical as adults, we're able to start experimenting, exploring, and trying to form safe, and there's no perfect safety, but safe enough, healthy relationships with people.
Yeah. It's so much more complicated, isn't it? When you can meet with a therapist and talk about a train crash, but it's not in the room. It's not to meet with a therapist and talk about a close relationship. You're trying to have a close relationship in order to talk about close relationships that have been unsafe. And that therapist it's almost a kind of double bind. If the therapist is good enough so that you can feel close, then the alarm bells are going to go off.
That's right. And that's when you get the acting out and the very horrible terminology I've heard. I hate to even say it out loud, but when I was up and coming in my training, borderline people are therapist killers, And what's happening is actually that intimacy starting to happen, a connection starting to happen. And just as you say, 5 alarm bells are going to go off and you'll get a lot of acting out behaviors. And it is hard on the therapist because I've been through it myself. And it does take a certain kind of therapist who's willing to go where angels fear to tread, because, you're going to go on a ride on that fire truck. But if the research shows, when they looked at what modality is most helpful for clients, therapy clients, it didn't matter the modality. It was the relationship with the therapist.
Yeah.
That determined the success of the treatment or the healing process.
Yeah. So there's hope that I hope for a kind of more integrated way of understanding these different, that there's some kind of continuum, isn't there, from simple PTSD, as it's called, train crash, the single event that's not relational, and then there's the multiple event, more relational trauma, and then there's what's called personality disorder.
I think most of my subscribers are people with those, what ACE talks about, chronic ongoing stressors from which there is no escape. And the place from which there's no escape is our family of origin. And even complex trauma is insidious, because I've had symptoms my entire life. And until I actually heard about complex trauma way after I graduated and got licensed, we weren't even complex trauma wasn't even talked about really until a few years ago, when I started getting continuing ed units on it, is when I realized, good Lord, I have every single one of those symptoms. And I think my entire life's been one big trauma response, including a lot of my major life decisions. And I bet many of my subscribers can relate to that statement. You're walking around with complex trauma, you don't even know you're having complex trauma, and then you go to get help, if you can even find help and access help and afford help, and you might get slapped with a borderline personality diagnosis.
Yeah. And in the UK, there are services. Going back about 30 years, there were services set up just to treat borderline personality disorder. It was almost like, let's not let them go to these less trained clinicians who are going to be judgmental, or have odd ideas about these people being attention seekers or doing things in a calculated way. Let's get them under one roof and develop a framework to be helpful. In a way that can, if you can escape the stigma outside, which is very difficult to do, then in theory, you can get treated and come out and be not meeting those those psychiatric criteria anymore. But that's almost a kind of an ideal way of thinking about it. And people have to go into ER and get treated in a disdainful way sometimes
Yeah.
by who have a way of thinking about these difficulties that's about 50 years or more.
Yeah, like here you might have a suicide ideation and end up on a 5150 hold and thrown into a 3-day, 72-hour treatment, and then you're slapped with a borderline personality disorder later. I don't know if Ali, yes, An's here, and this is a perfect time to bring Dr. Ali on camera because he's been personally slapped with these diagnoses. And I need to be able to see you come in again on my phone to get you in. So Ali, I need you to send me a message right now, and I can hopefully scroll down and see that. So I'm going to wait for On. And if you want to come on camera, anyone, you need to be on the Substack mobile app. And I'm also going to be looking for questions soon. And so I'm waiting for On to send me another message. There he is. Okay, dude, hold on. Invite to join. Ali was on my live stream last month. We had a great talk about all kinds of things, trauma and complex trauma, and what he's gone through in a 10-year journey. He's
And I
in
saw
Canada.
live streaming with his psychiatrist colleague from Pakistan. I think they're both from Pakistan.
Yeah. There he is. Hey, dude. Good to see
Hello.
you. Can you hear
Yeah,
us?
you
See
too.
us?
Yeah.
I'd look for you two guys to just start talking on. I know that you said you've had every diagnosis in the DSM.
Yeah.
But we can't talk about all those today. But how about talking about complex trauma and borderline personality disorder with Dr. Rogoff over there, Simon?
Hey, Dr.
I,
Rogoff. How you doing? Um, well, for me, well, could you repeat that question for a second?
it was a long
The
question.
diagnoses that you've gotten.
Oh, yes.
You were given a borderline personality diagnosis.
I was given actually every diagnosis in the book at some point or the other, and I was also treated for it, which means that I took like medications that had serious side effects and that I'm still like dealing with, and like it almost felt like a lot of harm was done before anybody had an idea what was going on. But I wanted to get your opinion on exactly this fact that a lot of us come with so many different labels. We've cycled through so many labels, but is it not like I've been studying, I've learned that you know with complex trauma, there is it's not just like a mental thing, or it's not something just happening in our mind. It's happening in our brain and our body, and there's all these stress cascades that go through our entire body. They shorten our life, they give us heart disease and diabetes and all of these things. So like all the other labels were fine, but the second that I got diagnosed with the borderline personality disorder label, it almost seemed as though my physical health was, it was like a double whammy where my physical health was deteriorating at twice the rate, and the people at the hospital were invalidating my physical illnesses at twice the rate as well. So there was almost a time period where, I would go to the hospital and tell people that, oh, I'm having a physical symptom, and they would send me back home until I came back again and again, and, stuff like that. So, what I guess what I'm trying to say is that isn't this multi-system disorder part and parcel of both BPD and C-PTSD? And I suppose like maybe we can make a distinction between classic PTSD being non-dissociative.
Okay, yeah, I think it's true that so there's so I know more about the development of treatment for borderline personality disorder over the last 50 years. I've been following that fairly closely. I guess, and the treatment for PTSD, I've also been following, and then the treatment of complex PTSD, I've been learning about more recently, the kind of bespoke treatment for complex PTSD. But yes, I think I'm a psychologist, so I'm not kind of wedded to the kind of the psychiatric diagnosis side of it. But I guess psychiatric diagnosis, if it's working well, points towards treatment that is helpful. That's the idea, isn't it? I think diagnoses get used for other purposes these days, particularly online, and that's the intention with a diagnosis. Hopefully, it's say, well, this treatment will help with if we've got it right, if we've got this diagnosis right. Then, but what these approaches have lacked is they've not been good at incorporating the body, the somatic symptoms, the kind of chronic illnesses that can come alongside complex trauma, the impacts on the body, and this more holistic approach. And obviously, there's huge amounts of research to be done around effects on, I think, things like the bowel and effects of complex stress on the bowel and other parts. And it sounds like, the responses you got to physical health problems were really unthoughtful, and they were making mistakes.
But I will say, it's for me in particular, being a medical professional, I sort of went home and opened the books up myself, and I was like, okay, I'm going to try to figure this out. And I quickly realized that the therapist that I was going to was kind of like, he saw he was like a hammer that saw everything as a nail, and it was he was not helpful in trying to help me and again, like I admit that, as a person with C-PTSD, I had a lot of behaviors when I was unhealed. I was significantly mentally ill, and there was a time where I did need somebody to reflect to me that I am engaging in behaviors that are not that are more desperate and frantic, and trying to meet needs that I did not even know I had, and stuff like that. So obviously I've been the typical C-PTSD DID patient, but it was not. I felt like there could be like more helpful ways where we can market narcissism to patients to sort of recognize it within themselves rather than stigmatizing it so much and making it seem like, because to me, like medically, it just feels like there's because I see everything as nerves and neurons. There's needs and necessities that get locked in development, because where development doesn't take place, your neurology gets locked over there, and you continue to have these needs that later on in your life that are conditioned in you forever, sort of, and breaking out of them is very possible. Like it's like you said that when a lot of these patients get the care that that they deserve. I did. I found a good therapist and a psychiatrist who told me, for one thing, borderline personality structure and personality disorder are two different things. And, there's explained all the nuances to me and everything. And I was able to sort of break out of that Kafka trap where, everything that I said was sort of used against me for some time.
Just like in scapegoating family systems, just had to throw that in.
Well, there's no research evidence base that blaming the client for anything helps the client, is there? So something's getting kind of acted out that's really unhelpful. I've heard some stories as well of clinicians blaming clients in a way that's just, a clinician's job is to be therapeutic and it's not. So there's no excuse, is there? And there's no evidence that, this person needs to be told off or blamed for something. It kind of, at worst, it recreates, reenacts trauma, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. As you know, in my knowledge, this is like a common experience for people who have C-PTSD and get diagnosed with BPD, and this it's and the reason why I'm bringing it up today in this video was because I had a conversation on one of my posts with with one of our subscribers, and I promised her that I'd bring it up over here today. How are we, as clients, how are we, I suppose, how can we get the best of, communicating with the clinician, with the therapist, where,
isn't it? Because when the system, as it were, the health system makes mistakes with a group of people who find it extremely difficult to trust, care.
Mhm.
It's like a double whammy, isn't it? So
Mhm.
I know I kind of have a picture of how things are in London. There's a lot of talk in my entire. I work for a large employer. There's a lot of talk about and training around trauma-informed care, holding in mind that not just those diagnosed with something with the word trauma in the name, but all of our clients bring trauma, and that we need to hold that in mind. We also need to hold that in mind in terms of, before we speak, how we feel about a client might be something we need to keep to ourselves. We might be impacted in some way. We might be just having a really stressful day, but we need to hold in mind that our job is to behave in a therapeutic way, in a helpful way, and the more we are educated about how it's our responsibility to control our behavior and be aware of, self-aware, and the more we're aware of that, the more responsible we are for our behavior, if you like. And I know, going back years, there's been a horrible anecdotes of experiences people have had, particularly in ER, partly because the clinicians are too stressed, they're not looking after themselves. Narcissistic clinicians not looking after themselves, but also because they're ill-educated, and their understanding, even their understanding of what personality disorder is distorted, or it's just undeveloped at that time. People didn't understand it. I was saying at the beginning of I don't know if I think you joined us at the beginning, that in my ideal future, in the not too distant future, we're calling borderline personality disorder a kind of complex PTSD. But it's still different. It's a different kind of complex PTSD than complex PTSD, because more the focus of treatment, first of all, probably needs to prioritize relationship and trust and impulsivity, for example, and we find that what helps is a therapy that focuses on building a very secure attachment and working within that, less looking at the memories, and more paying attention to what's happening now.
And that would include building a relationship container where there's some consistency, a sense of being safe enough, reliability, therapists showing up, so to speak, keeping commitments. I wanted to just jump in for anyone in the United States looking for trauma-informed care. Go look at the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, SAMHSA, website, because they list the principles of trauma-informed care. And when you interview a therapist, which I recommend you do before you sign up, see if they know about trauma-informed care principles, because it's easy to slap that on your little advertisement. But if you say to them, oh, do you practice under Sam's trauma-informed approach? And if they say, oh, sure, say, oh, so can you tell me the principles of that? You're going to smoke out whether they've even looked into that or not. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Please look at that website, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. Maybe give a couple more minutes, and I want to see if anyone else has a question or wants to come on camera. So why don't you guys wrap it up in the next couple minutes?
Yeah.
It's been I've loved hearing what you're talking about. I loved having you both on here.
I would love to have a dedicated conversation where, you know, we could have a chat about all of this stuff.
Well, let's set that up, you guys. We can do that offline. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I will get off camera, and you guys can get another person on. So thank you.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you so much. And yes, if you're willing, sounds like you are, let's get you two guys on for a dedicated live stream. I'll work that out with you guys backstage.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Behind the scenes. Thanks, On.
And An's in Canada, is he?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Canada. Great conversation. Okay. Hi, Megan, Kim, Suzette, a summit trip, Rosalie. Anyone have a question? Rosalie, I was looking for a question I thought you had, and I can't find it on the post. So if you have a question, I'm sitting here right now looking at the live chat. Hello again, Megan. And so you can write your question in here, Rosalie, and I'm actually looking at the chat now. I'll be able to see it. And does anyone want to come on camera to ask a question of Dr. Simon Rogoff? We're kind of covering a lot of ground today. Talked about a couple celebrities, family systems, narcissistic family systems, got into complex trauma and borderline personality disorder. And there's Rosalie. Okay, Rosalie would like to know of course, I know her story. I can't get into all the details, but Rosalie became very, very ill physically. And during that time, a sibling, long story, but they did it successfully. And Rosalie's talked to attorneys. All this is, you know, she's been dealing this up from a legal perspective for a while. One of the siblings got her slapped with, Rosalie, was it a borderline personality disorder diagnosis? I think it was a BPD diagnosis, and that got in her medical records. She's not BPD. And even with attorney assistance, she's having trouble getting this off. And I know you're in the UK, but in the UK, if something like that happened and someone has BPD on their medical record and a family member actually got it in there because Rosalie was in a compromised position and the sibling had the power to do that. How do you get something like that off? At least if she was in the UK, I'm just curious. And yes, it was borderline personality disorder.
I'm not a lawyer, but I think it sounds a bit kind of slanderous or something, doesn't it? But what's the process by which you have to cooperate in an assessment, surely, to get diagnosed with something anyway. So if somebody claims something about you which hasn't been arrived at through an assessment that you consented to, then how is that valid?
Rosalie, did you have some kind of assessment? And did anyone ever actually quote unquote assess you? I mean, you could have been on pain meds or who knows what happened, but let me know if someone actually gave you an assessment and came up with BPT, and that might be BPD, and that might be another reason you're having trouble getting it off your record. But it was just a terrible time. She was seriously, seriously ill. And while Rosalie's getting back to me, are there any other questions that come up from what we've kind of dived into? I think we're going to do some deep dives again with Dr. Rogoff and get Dr. Anali back here. Rosalie did not consent to an assessment. She was sent to a psychiatrist under the pretense it was for help with sleep meds. It's like a movie, a bad movie, a bad Lifetime women's movie.
Yeah, it sounds kind of sick.
I'm
Well,
glad you can say that. It's validating, huh, Rosalie? He's a psychologist. He said it's kind of sick. It is.
now I'm diagnosing things. I don't know,
We won't tell. We won't tell.
yeah, and also I guess you could pay for a new assessment that says you don't have BPD, but I mean,
It's getting it out of those medical records. Rosalie, what's the biggest problem of getting it off your medical records? Like, is there one main thing where the attorney cannot help get it off your medical record? Rosalie thanks you for saying it was sick. Incarnatum says, I suspect there's a lot of bad movies like that in here. We have a lot of bad movies like that in my subscriber community. Oh, now Megan's a nurse, RN. She says, as an RN in the hospital, sadly, I wonder if this kind of stuff happens a lot more than we realize. Elle has a good question. Elle, I see it, and I'll go back to that. Rosalie, let me know if there's one main thing your attorney is having trouble with in regard to getting that medical record expunged. Oh my God, the things my subscribers and clients go through. It's truly unbelievable, but I believe it because I've been through the same kind of stuff myself. And so I can easily believe the people that come to me or sign up for my Substack, unfortunately.
Yeah, you wrote an article about weaponizing the term narcissism, didn't you? But
yeah,
weaponizing.
We weaponize these diagnostic labels. I'm seeing if Rosalie heard me and writes back. So in the meantime, let me read you Elle's question. How can clinicians better distinguish between someone with borderline personality disorder and someone who has been chronically scapegoated or emotionally abused, invisible abuse, psycho-emotional abuse, especially when trauma symptoms overlap? That's a great question. I'll read it quickly one more time. How can clinicians better distinguish between someone with BPD and someone who has been chronically scapegoated or emotionally abused, especially when trauma symptoms overlap?
What was the first bit again? How can clinicians distinguish between
Someone with borderline personality disorder versus someone who's been, I would say, invisibly abused, psycho-emotional abuse in their family, scapegoated?
Well, as I say, I'm not I'm not a medical psychiatrist. I'm a psychologist. So, in terms of what the BPD is a diagnosis which tries to give a set of criteria for how somebody's managing themselves in the present, and then the other question is what has happened to them in the past. Now, let's say three people have this. Let's pretend they have the same kind of trauma. They could 20 years later be using different kinds of strategy to manage the consequences of that trauma. And if you like, the diagnosis is kind of classifying the strategies that they've arrived at from potentially the same trauma. So the nature of the trauma doesn't in itself predict exactly what somebody will be struggling with 20 years later.
Mm-hmm.
What psychiatry and psychologists are trying to help with is what's going wrong for you now. What is it that you're struggling to be able to do? How do you want to be able to function better? And so, in a way, the focus then is, well, what goes wrong, or what doesn't happen that you want to happen? What is it that you want to stop doing that you can't stop doing? And that's what psychiatry kind of these diagnoses that are concerned with the present focus on. And then there are diagnoses that have a different kind of history that start with World War I and shell shock, and where there's a different kind of system of naming things in it and linking them to the trauma. So I don't think so. Somebody in theory could have a particular kind of scapegoating experience and develop symptoms that are in a list under the name of BPD, which needs to be called something else. It needs to be called complex PTSD type 2 or something.
Yeah, I love that you want to throw out that name, just like I want to throw out reactive abuse. Like, no, I'm responding to horrible, harmful, abusive behavior.
really what we're concerned with in services is what's not happening for you now. What kind of life do you want to live, and where is it really not happening?
That's your starting point.
And then
Yeah.
we know that we'll help with that based on and we might understand, even if somebody has BPD, we understand that mentalization based treatment is based on attachment theory, and we would understand it as a consequence of developmental trauma, attachment trauma.
Yeah, attachment trauma is so important. I remember my first private practice supervisor, I begged her for a year, like going to a Zen master, please, will you mentor me? It took a year for her to say yes, kept knocking on the door. But she said, Rebecca, in family systems, we have to go back to the scene of the crime with our client. I said, the scene of the crime? She said, the family of origin. And it's that attachment trauma, that early relational trauma. And I was thinking with Elle's question, for me, I'm going to suss that out also potentially through my assessment and what questions I'm asking. I think a lot of it is knowing what questions to ask. And so we need very skillful and insightful questionnaires. The one I developed for what I ended up calling family scapegoating abuse, now is being used in peer-reviewed quantitative studies on FSA, and we're getting published now internationally. But it was the questions I'm asking that can help me determine many, many things, and how much might be from invisible emotional abuse, what might be organic mental illness, depending on how someone's presenting, and on it goes. But I think your point's a good one. Regardless of what was happening in the childhood home, what's happening right now, how do we help you with that? And with complex trauma, you are saying going back, not necessarily digging stuff out so you're overwhelmed, but that implicit memory that's held in the body and comes out as somatic symptoms. We do need to do maybe some releasing of our story, which happens a lot on Substack. People are I'm even doing it on the Inviolate Self Substack, starting to really share our stories. For a lot of my subscribers, it doesn't feel safe to share their story under their own name. And so everything's locked up in them, except maybe a journal. But the memory are important. Going to the past is important with complex trauma. You emphasized that earlier. And that for me, that is how my questionnaire ties in, where I ask them to share some of their past.
Yeah. And I think we meet some clients whereby there's a question about, do we start with something that is about memory reprocessing, as it were, trauma-focused therapy called, or do we start with something that's more relational and kind of focused on the present and seeing what comes up in the relationship in the present? And some of that is from the past, but it's being feels as if it's happening now between us. Therapy.
I think it was Fritz Perl that started Gestalt therapy, and he said Freud was always busy trying to find the dying body at the bottom of the lake, but I just look at the bubbles on the top of the lake, and I'm going to find out about that body at some point, and which is how Gestalt therapy, here and now, we're here in the here and now, and they would be focusing more on the present moment, knowing those bubbles are emanating from something deep down in the lake.
Yeah. And we, even if we're working in the present, we need to understand where it comes from. If you experience me in a way that seems to relate to something that's not happening here now, I need to know about your past. Does it make sense? How do we make sense?
Need that context. That's right. Let me just look at my live stream again. Oh, okay. Rosalie wrote, we're back to Rosalie's saga. And I had asked, what's the attorney struggling with to get this off her medical record, this borderline personality disorder diagnosis? And she says, the young psychiatrist refuses to change her opinion. Even the director at the same clinic stated it was a horror story and she needs to retract this diagnosis, but the psychiatrist refuses to do it. No one can make her. Rosalie, write me back. Can the courts make her? Can a court of law make her? Because an unbelievable amount of my clients and subscribers have had to get attorneys at my recommendation. And in every case, they've won. They've won with things like this. It went with withheld estates and all kinds of stuff that happens to us. Go ahead.
But there's the process, the dodgy process by which this diagnosis has been, the kind of deceptive process by which it's been arrived at. And then there's is it being used to discriminate? Because we have laws. I mean, I'm in the UK, so I don't, it may be different, but we have laws about how you can discriminate or not against somebody based on their diagnosis. So having a diagnosis, does that mean that somebody can discriminate against her by saying, I don't know, we have people who, for example, somebody might have diagnosis with BPD and there were questions about their parenting or something, but having a diagnosis.
That's a great question. We're weaving in Rosalie's saga. Rosalie, tell me, I would not want that diagnosis on my medical records. I want you to know I validate you on that. But practically speaking, what's this diagnosis doing? How is it impacting you? Please write me back on that. Seb has a question. I could probably go till 1:45 just because I have to drive 2 hours after this to do something. I'd love to stay longer. But Seb asked, is there time for Dr. Rogoff to explain more about one of his quotes? Separating the art from the artist is a complex challenge. Especially, and then they go on to say, especially if the artist is a narcissist and local celebrity, religious leader. So going no contact solves the FSA issues as best, as it can. But yeah, your quote, separating the art from the artist is a complex challenge. Why don't you speak to that for a minute?
Do we know which artist this is?
Seb, do you remember what artists we were talking about? And they go on to say, when the abuser is represented as a godlike figure, how do you deal with that aspect? And I've had clients who have been maybe, say, small town in Ireland, something like that. I have international clients. And that parental figure literally kind of owns the town. The town's in their back pocket. And I've had celebrity clients where, as they started to get known through film and music and such, and he said that's kind of the Irish way. They kind of smash you down to make sure you can't get too big for your boots. And the abuse and scapegoating is really, really severe. But the whole town's in the back pocket of a parent. And so no contact, not only no contact, I've had clients they've moved, 5,000 miles away. That's what it took for them to feel safe. Mm-hmm. And I've heard their stories. I understand why they moved that far away.
Well, it's just a horrific power imbalance, isn't it?
Well said.
I mean, it's a bit of a British story, but I read about Jimmy Savile, and he was so powerful and so loved, and yet he was a prolific criminal, and there were all these victims, and none of them felt like they could speak up. And he had actually systems for maintaining his power as well. But that's an extreme example, But if you're, I don't know which artist this is, but I suppose what I've been interested in is how. Well, it sounds like there's two questions. One is if your abuser or narcissistic parent is famous or powerful, well, how do you exert your own reality? Where do you start? And what will the costs of that be? It's very complex, isn't it? So that's one. And the other bit of that is about the art versus the artist.
The art versus the artist, yes.
And how art can be a strategy for finding power, for becoming also idealized. Obviously, if you're successful, but also for we started off this whole conversation of thinking about internalizing a parent figure. But when I wrote about But we can also project our vulnerable childhood self, the unsafe child, can't we? I'm thinking about Charles Chaplin with his tramp character. We can
Yeah.
find in our art of distancing ourselves from vulnerability. Charles Chaplin wasn't the destitute tramp. He was making fun of it. And yet at the age of 8, he was the destitute tramp. Albeit with a famous mum and a famous dad. They were nowhere to be seen, and he was sleeping on the streets. So the art,
which is why he identifies so much with that little boy. Was it Jackie Coogan, that little boy that was filmed? That was kind of this little tramp boy. I always felt that was Charlie Chaplin when he was young.
Yeah, he had to cry on screen, and his dad threatened to throw him in the poorhouse if he didn't cry. And then he tears, and everyone was like shocked that the Charles Chaplin, this very narcissistic man, suddenly was really affected and picked up the kid, because he'd been in the poorhouse. That it took him back there, I guess.
And I remember I read years ago Shirley MacLaine's book Out on a Limb, and I didn't know Warren Beatty was her brother for years and years because they looked nothing alike, but they were two siblings, Warren Beatty, Shirley MacLaine, and the parents were performers and madly in love with each other. And Shirley says she thinks her and Warren both went into performing just to get attention from the parents. It was the only way they get really any quality attention was for the parent to go,
the only thing
encourage them to be performers.
Yeah. So we talked earlier on about the emotional invisibility, not being seen, recognized as having your own mind, your own feelings, your own desires. And at some point, the sad kind of step-on strategy for the child is to give up in a way that their real self being recognized, and then to have their performing self validated.
That on some level, unconsciously, it's like this real self thing's not working too well. I need to become someone else. And that would tie in with my, to some degree, my chapter, why I included in my book a chapter called The False Self and a chapter called The True Self, because I do feel healing from scapegoating and any kind of family abuse, invisible abuse, is a process of reclaiming and realigning with that true self nature, or however one thinks of it, depending on their religious or spiritual beliefs, the inviolate self, the Christ self, Christ nature, Buddha nature. But to come back to our true nature, both as a personality and for some people, maybe something more transcendent or transpersonal, but the real self just gets, and I'll tell you, with me, I was, who can believe it, but it's true. I was crippled with shyness. I had select mutism, probably would have been diagnosed with severe autism when I was little, completely internalized, unable to communicate. And I remember specifically at the age 11, when something happened I won't get into now, I thought to myself, I'm not going to get anything out of life unless I become someone else. And I developed a very extravagant, outgoing, externalized personality. And then as I got older and started really healing after I realized what had happened to me, I've now become much more internalized and more quiet. I can turn it on for the live streams, but on my personal life, I'm much more.
So you've developed utility. You've got different strategies for different situations.
I developed a strategy of I'm never going to get anything I want or need. I'm not getting it in the family, and I'm not going to get it out there in the world unless I literally become someone else. I became lots of someone else's. If you look at my photos, many, many, many people with many different lifestyles, and I'll do a lifestyle and I'm done with it and I move on. I'm still in a process of integrating kind of all those selves.
And along the way, there's probably some strength in that, being able to do that as you're doing when you're on a live stream, for example. There's strengths in it, and then there's developing the versatility to be able to have the option to connect to your true, your authentic,
my authentic self, which now I share more on my other Substack, the Inviolate Self. That's exactly why I did that. We have about 10 more minutes or so, and welcome to everyone who's been coming in. And I'm looking for questions. I see you have a question, but I'm going to do a dedicated live stream with you and Dr. Rogoff. So I'm seeing if other people have questions right now. Oh, Incarnatum says, who's a supervillain in a narcissist system? Oh, it's true. This was true for me. The supervillain in a narcissistic system is the truth teller. Which, I mean, that I've experienced that. What's your thoughts about that?
So that's the same as the scapegoat, is it?
Well, I think we get scapegoated because some of us, it's not, even if it's not coming out of our mouth, it might be a look in our eyes. Um, the emperor's wearing no clothes. The child who might actually, in some way, make it clear they're aware the emperor's, maybe that narcissistic parent, is not wearing any clothes, who can see a more hidden reality. And that's very threatening to that power holder in the family. And I do believe that's how a lot of scapegoating can start. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, because the person with the power in the system can't tolerate their strategies being undone or the truth
Challenged.
Yeah, they can't tolerate their persona being kind of dismantled or being
And
challenged.
why can't they tolerate it? I agree.
Because of what it's there to protect them from. I mean, I'm not making excuses for but their strategy, which is, let's just say, abusive, or at least disempowering, is a strategy that it impacts on others unfairly, but it's a strategy for compensating for something, isn't it? That maybe they can't tolerate vulnerability, or
their real self got snuffed out at an early age.
Yeah.
And they have to maintain those strategies as a parent.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that they're responsible for, as an adult, they're responsible for their strategies. As the person holding power, they're responsible for their strategies. The child is a child, and they don't have power. And
right.
And I've become more and more interested in this, how intrinsic to the human experience is power and vulnerability, how we're born into this extreme vulnerability by nature, every human being, and then how we go from there. We find that vulnerability is safe or not, or somewhere in the middle.
Yes. And I have a chapter in my book on the empath, just because in my research, which I've done years of research, so many people did identify as a highly sensitive person, or the empath in their family, or the quote unquote truth teller. And being an empath type or strongly, I mean, I remember being 3-4 years old and just my whole focus was on my disabled alcoholic father. And I learned to roll cigarettes for him, 3 years old. And I would smoke with him. I swear to God, I've blown smoke rings when I was 3 years old. I was like Tatum O'Neal in Paper Moon, and even drank some vodka, I thought it was water. My whole focus was on his vulnerability and taking care of him. And that was because of my empathic nature, was I saw his suffering. And so I wanted to ease it even at the age of 3 or 4 years old. But that vulnerability is also what got me creamed in my family, because I was the feeler for the family and brought up things the family didn't want to feel.
Yeah. And so you're parentified is another word, isn't it? That you're.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
The
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because my mom was at work and my siblings were at school, and it was me in a dark home with shuttered windows with a guy drinking himself to death. That was my early years. Well, my neural pathways were forming. I'm surprised I can even be here in the capacity that I am, because I did not get optimal environment for those first critical 4 to 6 years when 80% of the brain is forming.
Yeah. Which offers hope, and that's one part of your role,
I
isn't
hope
it?
they offer hope. Yes, I'm sure my neural pathways are not connected that well, but I do the best I can.
you're living proof that of the recovery, the flexibility of human beings to adapt after. I think Arne's talked about this as well, about how after the situation, when we've come out of the extreme situation, then what are we able to change our strategies? Are we able to build these neural pathways? Are we able to learn new templates for relationships? And
this might be a good note for us to close on, about hope, about building new templates, about the fact that we really can. I'm never sure what recovery, healing, all of it sounds like a trope, but we really can be released from the scapegoat narrative, as I call it. And we really can go through a journey where we do identify and reconnect and join and align with the truth of who we are. And that's a journey I'm still on. I think it's a lifetime journey. And I don't mind self-disclosing. I wouldn't have in the past. Older I get, I'm like, F it, I don't care what anyone knows about me now. And I hope it's grist for the mill and serving people, to know a little bit about where I came from, where I'm a 7 out of the 10 on the ACE score. And I also wish the ACE test asked more about invisible abuse, psycho-emotional abuse. Something I'd like to make a movement. Another movement for is we need to change the questions on the ACE score or add some, but that we can build new templates. You running a program, coming full circle, running a program for people with complex trauma and borderline personality disorder, which you want to toss out and make a new term for. You see healing, I bet. I bet you see people change and building new templates.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I would encourage people, if they've been through a program like that, to get re-diagnosed at the end. Get it taken off. Get a report. Because we don't always remember to say, they no longer meet criteria for this, or
that's right. You can. In the UK, I know because I've done it. I've had clients go back and after I've worked with them, and their diagnosis was taken off or changed to something more like adjustment disorder, something less pathologizing, where they could still get services. I always, as a private practice therapist, I would always give everyone adjustment disorder no matter what, because insurance would cover it. And I would say, because we're all usually struggling to adjust to reality as it's unfolding every nanosecond. We're having to shift to reality as it's unfolding. And I learned that from my mentor, my private practice supervisor. I bet we have a lot of other questions in there, but I do have to drive a couple hours to another town today. And I wish what I want to do is have you back. We can do a dedicated live stream with you and Dr. An Ali. And then we can do another live stream with you. And now that people have met you, we can say, hey, what else do you want to know? People might want to come on camera with you. People might have more questions because they're seeing a little bit more of your background. We covered your interest with the celebrity case studies because that's how I met you here. But I think people might want to really deep dive into the complex trauma, into the scapegoating, deeper dive into the narcissistic family system.
Yeah.
And we're kind of finding our way because this was our first live stream. And then I can tell from the comments what people are jazzed about and want more of. And so I'll be able to talk to my community and say, what do you want us to focus on? That's what I love about having my community. And so I want to thank Dr. Rogoff and apologize to anyone whose question I didn't get to. But what you can do is please write it down, save it. And when I post our next live stream with Dr. Rogoff, put your question in there or come on the live stream the second time we do one, and I'll make sure to get that question. I want to thank Dr. An Ali for coming on camera. We always love to have him on. He adds so much. And I want to thank everyone, whether you're a paid subscriber or not. I love having you here and seeing you involved in our chat. And I hope you free subscribers get something out of it. Remember, you can ask questions on the public posts I put out when I tell you what guest I'm going to have on. Anything you'd like to say as your farewell to us?
Well, thanks. Thanks very much for having me on, Rebecca. It's gone so much quicker than I thought it was.
It flies by.
It's a great community that you've built here on
I'm
Substack.
lucky. Yeah, I love my community. And I mean that. I don't just say I love my community. I love my community. And they're so gracious and flexible, and patient as I've been building this the last year and starting things and stopping things and trying new things. And hey, live chat people, we're trying our free chat space. And Teresa C's moderating it right now. And go to our private chat area and you'll see the great stuff she's doing, making all these new topics and categories. So I'm going to get in touch with you privately to set up another joint with on, and then we'll do another one-on-one with us, because I love doing these live streams so much. And thanks everyone for your questions and your comments. So it was wonderful to have you.
How far in our conversation it is by how dark it is in my room.
Oh, I know. Now you're like a film noir movie. It's like one of your movies, like Humphrey Bogart, who did a lot of film noir. Yes, the lighting's perfect.
We'll give him the credit.
Yes, Hitchcock did that lighting too. I just need a staircase going up, and then a spider's web, and we'll have our Hitchcock. We need a spider's web behind you.
The biographies on that man, I'm tempted. Thanks.
I love that you and I can talk about all this celebrity stuff. I used to read a ton of celebrity books, and it's like, oh, their life was worse than mine, and maybe there's hope for me. Well, on that note, if you missed my coffee cup, everyone, I said I'd show it again. If I hug you, it's to figure out how big a hole I need to dig in the backyard. I did that for our topic today on narcissism. We had a huge crowd here today. Very big turnout. I love it. And there's usually 2,000 or 3,000 people who watch the playback. And your live chat, everybody, does not go on the playback. It disappears like Mission Impossible. It explodes. And no one will ever see your private live chat when I put it out publicly. Okay, I'll be in touch with you, and thanks again.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
And to my community, thank you. And think of more questions you might have. I know there might have been some frustration just in the beginning. We're kind of finding our way, and some people do want to hear about the celebrities and narcissism and such. And appreciate those of you who hung in there. And as we find our groove, and I think we could talk about some amazing stuff with both Dr. Rogoff and Dr. Ali. And remember, you can come on camera next time if you want. And I'm going to do a private live chat for paid subscribers only later this month. And I'll get that date out once I figure it out. And those ones are just us, paid subscribers, and me. And have a wonderful rest of the week. I'm getting a post out you'll want to read on Wednesday, a public post, something I haven't really addressed before, on how when you start to have healthier behaviors, it doesn't go so well for you necessarily, and people can really push back. I did a video on that, but I haven't done an article yet. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye.